Let's get right to it here. And Stan, I guess you have the first story here. And go ahead, start.
Well, there's an interesting article in IB Times, a UK publication online. It says that, claims that Russia is emerging as a cyber threat and is playing some sort of like a long game in the Cyberwar campaign. They kind of list a few countries that have emerged as big threats in this cyber threat landscape, and they talk about in the it's an interesting article. First of all, it's got a lot of interesting points, but I guess one thing that it tries to bring up is this Russian cyber threat, and something that I don't think was widely reported in the past. Most people have always associated APT with China for some reason, but this article focuses on Russia and North Korea and Iran a little bit.
So are there any what do they mean by a long game?
I think what they're trying to say is that they kind of have not released their full capability. So I think the article, in citing some sources, is saying that they have a lot of capability. They're in a big economy. They throw a lot of resources towards the cyber threat. Well, they suspect that they throw a lot of resources towards the cyber program, but they haven't seen a lot of very complex malware yet, or it hasn't been published or talked about widely. And so they think that they're kind of holding off their best tactics, and they're just using what they can when they need to. One interesting thing they mentioned, we can only speculate if it's true or not, is that let's say the Russian government was actually sponsoring something, they would actually do it through hackers. So a third party might be actually doing the cyber threat, but not the government itself.
So I think we've seen that kind of thing before, or at least there's been discussion about that kind of thing before, where presumably another organization, perhaps an independent group or a contractor per se, might be actually doing the attacks. And then I think there have even been stories that have described almost the inverse of that attackers have gone out sort of in an entrepreneurial sense, gone out and tried to gather information, steal intellectual property, and perhaps are selling it back to whoever might be interested in it. And if it happens to be information that a nation state might want, they might purchase that.
Yeah, exactly. Which makes me think that it almost doesn't matter what kind of who the threat actor is necessarily. If you got one on your network, any kind, from a simple crime gang-related activity or financial malware, it's probably best to just get it off your network as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. But by the same token, I think it kind of matters to understand a little bit who you're dealing with. And we kind of pointed out sometimes it's very difficult to determine who might be attacking you, but there are sort of indicators, the type of malware they're using, some of the tools and the techniques that they're using, and what they're going after might provide it. And I think that's sort of inverse as well. That is, if you have some idea what the group might be, what might be motivating them, you might have some idea where they'd be going or what systems you need to protect better against that type of threat. And I think there's some value in that.
Yeah, well, definitely, I think in the crucial steps of incident response, when you don't have a lot of time to think about it, if you do know where the threat is coming from, it can kind of help make your plan a little bit better of how to approach the incident. Like you said, where are you going to focus your protections? What kinds of things should you watch out for? Are they going to come in and destroy your network, or are they going to try to stay low and kind of hide out, beaconing once in a while? So, yeah, like you said, it does matter in terms of understanding what kind of threat they might present you with.
I think James Clapper was mentioned in that article, right?
Yes.
And I think he was, he's the director of national intelligence and for the United States, even though it's a UK article. I think they were quoting him, and he's come out. There's a national threat assessment report that comes out each year, and they basically reported this year they put cyber threats at the top of the list in terms of national security concerns, and then followed that with basically indicating that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran were the primary nation states that we should be concerned about. And I think there are demonstrations of that sort of thing. I had the opportunity to see James Clapper speak at the International conference on cybersecurity in January, and that's basically a co-sponsored activity. It's with the FBI and Fordham University. It's a pretty good conference. James Comey spoke there as well. He's the director of FBI, and at that time, this was before the National Threat Assessment Report. It was all about North Korea. You know, it was basically the point where in fact, that was where they came out to say that they think North Korea was the perpetrator behind the attacks against Sony. And so it was, there was a lot of discussion about it at the time, and that made it in the press. It was, it's a good conference if anybody has the opportunity to go to it. In particular, if you're local to the New York City area, it's one that's convenient as well. So one of the few that happens to be on the East Coast in the dead of winter. In fact, but a good conference nevertheless. Any thoughts from you, Jim?
Years back, it was mostly criminal activity coming out of Russia, and then it moved to Ukraine, and the capability of the nation state is always something that, in the back of my mind, they've got a large military. They can funnel a lot of money into it. So I don't doubt that there is some truth to what they're saying in the article, that they've been sitting on some of their capabilities and not using it. Hopefully they won't use it.
Yep, that's true. And I think in a lot of I think there are generally two types of threats. Sometimes they don't get distinguished very well. One is industrial espionage, and there certainly is evidence of industrial espionage taking place, and there have been some exchanges of accusations around that. The other one would be, I guess, this notion of cyber Pearl Harbor, the notion of setting up an attack. And I think, in fact, one of the topics they talk about in that article is this idea that, the attack, if there were ever to be such an attack, it's not going to just happen overnight. There's a lot of establishing footholds, ground to be able to do that. And that's one of the things that is sort of a subtlety in the nation-state attacks. They may establish a foothold and the intent would be to stay invisible, to not necessarily steal any information, just to establish that foothold, and do it in a lot of places, so that if they want to pull the trigger, they've already, it's kind of like laying landmines against your enemy, so that if they try to cross the line, it's they're already and waiting for them. So.